Our next speaker is Shannon Davis, a senior lecturer in landscape planning within the School of Landscape Architecture at Lincoln University. She specialises in urban agriculture, food landscapes and landscape planning, and leads the research theme Future Foodscapes for Health within the Centre of Excellence, designing future productive landscapes and also contributing to future agro-ecosystems research. Shannon will discuss how the productive land surrounding New Zealand's cities and settlements is increasingly under threat from urban expansion. Please welcome Shannon Davis.
I whānau mai o nō te wai o Ohinamuri ki Waihi. He uria hou ko te mana me Ingarangi, ko John Durwood toku korua, Ngāti Hapu o Ngāti Tūrangi Tūkua, ia I whangai. Ko Pihanga te Monga, ko Tongariro te Awa, ko Taupo Nui a Tia te Moana, I mihi ana ki a Ngāti Tūwharetoa, ko Shannon toku ingoa. I mihi ana a hou, kia mana whenua, o te takiwa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for having me here today. Today I'm going to present a project that a team of us from the Research Centre, Designing Future Productive Landscapes, have been exploring for the past 12 months, investigating the question, how can landscapes for both people and production prosper within peri-urban New Zealand? The research has been funded by the National Science Challenge, Our Land and Water, and has included 7 contributing researchers and postgraduate students. The research we'll present today is one of 3 research tracks conducted as part of this funding. The other 2 tracks encompass a te ao Māori approach to peri-urban land use consideration, being led by John Blythe and a team from Becca. And we've also been working on a study in partnership with Te Whakatohia, exploring land use planning for multi-generational kai sovereignty and security. And that's been guided by Dr. Te Kahutu Maxwell and Uncle Danny Poihipi. Today, however, I'm going to present our research focused at the intersection of housing and food production on the edges of our cities and settlements, the peri-urban zone. As I'm sure you are all aware, the peri-urban zone of Aotearoa is facing unprecedented pressure from land use change. With many post-colonial settlements occurring on and within close proximity to highly productive land, the continued growth and urbanisation of New Zealand's population has seen urban centres expanded, building on some of our most versatile and highly productive soils, directly impacting the location and distribution of food production, a key provisioning ecosystem service. As set out in the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land, avoiding urban encroachment and protecting land for food production are matters of national importance. So how did we get here? Looking back, we know that no city was ever planned without first considering where the food would come from. Cities were located in fertile, well-connected landscapes that allowed for the efficient growing and distribution of resources. New Zealand cities were no exception, and many are located on our most elite soils. The image here shows a 1676 map of London, a city that revolved around the production, movement, distribution and collection of food. Today, this legacy is still visible in the 494 streets, lanes and squares named after food and beverages. The city includes places named after 17 types of fish, an oyster and a crab. 43 London streets are named after chestnuts, more than any other food. And there is reference to both ham and bacon, but no pork. Having zoned food production out of our cities over the last 100 years, New Zealand, like London and much of the global north, has pushed food production to the urban edge, which is now also under threat. Facing the pressures of population growth and urbanisation, cities around the world are rapidly expanding, building on the productive land that often surrounds them. They are grappling with issues of local food security as food landscapes are pushed further away and often onto less fertile soils. With many of our global cities located on the world's most fertile soil, we are now recognising the multi-generational and irreversible impact of losing elite soils to urban expansion. New Zealand engages today a global food shed in both directions. Aotearoa produces enough calories to feed 40 million people globally, yet alongside this, we also import enough calories to feed nearly our entire population. And we see and experience today a clear spatial disconnection between where our food is being produced and where the majority of Kiwis live, which for 90% of us is in urbanised areas. The Ministry for the Environment reports that the area of highly productive land that was unavailable for agriculture in Aotearoa increased by 54% between 2002 and 2019. Where we choose to live and the food we choose to consume have an influence on the demand for land and how it is used. New Zealand's population is projected to reach 6.8 million by 2073 and will continue to drive the demand for food and housing around our cities. On the whole, our current approach to the peri-urban zone is one which favours rural transformation and urbanisation, where our peri-urban areas change to meet urban demands, which are often for low-density, single-storey, detached greenfield subdivisions. Farms are also being planned out of the peri-urban landscape under pressure from land planning and development, as seen here, where the roads in a new subdivision literally stand waiting to be connected once the farmer gives up the land. So you can see the road is here, and then it stops while the farm is still in productive land use, and it carries on here, waiting for the farmer to give up his land, or her land. Highly productive peri-urban land is being fragmented by housing development, limiting the efficiency of food production systems that are still operating. And land is being subdivided into unproductive rural residential sections and lifestyle blocks. The quarter-acre dream legacy continues to live on in New Zealand. Kiwis love to have their own space, and many newcomers come to Aotearoa to live this dream also. So how can landscapes for both people and production prosper within peri-urban New Zealand? We looked at this question using a design thinking methodology, following the 5 steps of empathise, where we learnt about the issues and the concerns and aspirations of stakeholders. We then set about to define the research framework, sharpening our understanding of the matters of key importance to the different stakeholder groups. Thirdly, we went through a stage of ideation where we spatialised ideas and possibilities identified through the previous 2 stages. Next, we created graphic representations of the ideas generated before finally heading back out to the stakeholders to test and evaluate the ideas. Our first exercise was running a workshop with the Canterbury Mayoral Forum. During this workshop, we had the mayors, councillors and professional staff think about the issues facing their districts when thinking about food and housing. The word cloud here represents the issues that were identified through the first workshop activity. Issues of reverse sensitivity, housing, food and concerns around loss and development of productive land were all part of the workshop narrative. Secondly, we had the participants critique 5 scenarios for urban growth, considering a business as usual approach, and then 4 alternative approaches where soil, transport and residential density were all highlighted and put in a priority hierarchy. One of the most valuable outcomes of this activity was to see no participants choose the business as usual model. There was a consensus among all participants that we need to change how we think about urban growth in this country. So that workshop set us up to look internationally for ideas and case studies that could provide interesting approaches to land use negotiation on the edges of cities. Primarily, we investigated the enablers and barriers to peri-urban food production within these countries to help formulate the questions of our survey that we then went out to conduct with both residents and growers who were operating and living within the peri-urban zone of Waikirikiri, the Selwyn district in Canterbury. Part of the Selwyn district, for those who are not familiar with it, forms much of the south and west peri-urban zone of Ōtautahi Christchurch. Over the past 25 years, the district has seen immense population growth, with the vast majority of urban expansion focused within the Christchurch city commuter belt. Figures from Statistics New Zealand show Waikirikiri's population has reached 80,000 residents, seeing the biggest proportional population growth in 2022. So given this population growth and the fact that the whenua here includes large areas of high-class soils, we set about conducting our study. We surveyed over 2,000 households in Rolleston, Darfield and Lincoln, 3 towns sitting within the peri-urban commuter belt and each with a strong history based in agricultural land use. Overall, the residents were overwhelmingly positive about food production occurring close to where they live. One participant commented, "I like seeing cows and sometimes sheep over the back fence. It's important to me for my daughter to have a strong connection to farming and agriculture." When questioned about their feelings towards a range of production types, market gardening, orcharding, when questioned about their feelings towards a range of production types, market gardening, orcharding, berries, honey and crops for human consumption all came out higher than beef and sheep farming, crops for livestock consumption, with dairying attracting the most negative responses. Many of these negative responses were supported by concerns for human and environmental health. One participant commented, "The New Zealand dairy industry practices have moved over recent years to high yields with less concerns over the immediate effect they are having on the environment. We see this locally with shelter belts being removed, reduced biodiversity, and token efforts to reduce herd access to waterways." Again, when asked about their feelings towards different production systems, the majority of participants felt more positive than negative about them all. The overwhelming response was positive towards having farming and the growing of kai close by. A common thread recorded from participants is represented by this quote: "The Lincoln area has a large history of farming and this should be both encouraged and protected. Far too much arable farming land is being converted to residential use with little consideration to the selection of less productive ground for housing." When seeking to understand the negative issues that residents do have, issues were clearly felt around animal farming, especially dairy farming. Specifically, participants spoke of concerns around the impacts on human health and quality of life, particularly with regards to water pollution, and the impacts on the environment also, again with particular regard to water. When asked about their reasons why they like living near food production landscapes, the increased opportunity or possibility to access local produce came out as the top explanation. We also ran a survey with growers and farmers operating within the peri-urban zone. Key to the response narrative here was that around communication and understanding. Communication was determined to be a key when seeking a positive relationship with consumers and the community. Next came step 2 in the design thinking methodology, where we set about analysing the survey data to define what the issues were and what aspirations there were for the future. We identified 15 key themes that were grouped around 4 priority areas, and they were food and farm accessibility, environmental health and protection, human health and wealth, and finally there was a theme around education and communication. We then took these 15 themes and spatialised them into 12 concepts for peri-urban land use, directly out of the survey data, where both food and housing were considered. These simple spatial representations were then combined into 5 land use scenarios. Scenario 1 was the creation of a low-impact farming belt around the town centre. The second scenario was looking to create a multifunctional green belt around the town centre. Scenario 3 was to enforce a hard urban-rural boundary between farming and housing. The fourth scenario was to create a patch network of urban farms within a matrix of housing. And scenario 5 was the inverse to this, creating housing corridors within a matrix of farms. We continued to work up these scenarios, providing details that had been part of the survey responses, including typical activities and also looking at an application of the concept to a hypothetical peri-urban town. We then ran a workshop with residents and growers together to test and evaluate each scenario. You can see here that with scenario 1, the low-impact farming belt would consist of organic, small-scale, plant-based farms that produced kai primarily for the local market. The belt would not be publicly accessible, but would host a range of community food outreach. When evaluated at the workshop, participants commented on the promotion and connection between residents and the farming community, and the potential for farm gate sales, personal contact with the producers, and increased agricultural literacy for townfolk. Scenario 2 focused on the development of a multifunctional greenbelt around the township. The greenbelt acts as a buffer to the rural farms and includes such activities as public spaces, community gardens, sports fields, allotments, walking tracks, stormwater management, playgrounds. The greenbelt, however, is not public. The greenbelt is publicly accessible. When evaluated at the workshop, participants commented on how this model illustrates a good balance between housing and accessible food production. They also commented on how the scenario provides more benefits than just food production. The food-related benefits identified included the visibility of primary production as it happens, resulting in a greater awareness of problems with crops such as seasonal drops, fungus, and pests. The third scenario was a simple, hard boundary approach, similar to one of the scenarios that we had given the mayoral forum, but with higher density housing in this case. With this scenario, housing and urban growth only occurs on the existing footprint, protecting the soil and leaving the agricultural land to produce food primarily for the export market. Participants at the workshop spoke about the need to build up rather than out. They spoke about this being better for the environment, but not how New Zealanders generally want to live. They identified that mindset change would need to occur for this model to work. It was also acknowledged that food would not be accessible to the community with this model, as the rural farmland is orientated towards the export market. This was one of the most interesting findings actually of the survey, where residents spoke about their desire to actually be able to access the produce that they can see being produced over their back fence or at the end of their road. Scenario 4 was a pretty radical idea to most of the participants. This scenario sees existing public open spaces converted to farms, along with any new residential development, including planned urban farms. These farms would be linked by green corridors and would be small, diverse, and would produce products primarily for the local market. For the evaluation of this scenario during the workshop, this model actually appeared to be the favourite. Comments such as, "This is my favourite scenario if the planners could just do it," and "Love this, great opportunity for producer-consumer relationships, it would be a great place to live." However, interestingly, it was ranked least highest when the participants were asked to rate the scenarios together. Finally, scenario 5 suggested a concept where farming within the peri-urban zone would become the matrix, and highest density housing corridors would be set up around the farms, which would be focused on the local market when they were situated close to the existing township and would be export orientated the further away from the housing you moved. This model elicited mixed comments. On the one hand, one participant stated, "What farmer wants to farm with high density housing on all sides?" But on the other hand, another participant commented, "With food production so local, residents are surely to buy and support products and force the farms to be more conscious about farming methods, knowing they are being watched. With so much farming, lots of diverse enterprise can exist and thrive." So finally, as I mentioned a minute ago, participants were asked to rate the scenarios, with scenario 2, the multifunctional greenbelt, coming out as the highest rated model. The greenbelt has, as we all know, been used throughout history to control and direct urban growth, and as well as to protect farmland on the edges of our cities. And we are reminded of the whakatauki, kia whakatomuri, te haere whakamua. I walk backwards into the future with my eyes fixed on the past. Through this research, we are highlighting the need to elevate the consideration and planning for the peri-urban zone. We've established in this research that food production within the peri-urban zone is a key provisioning ecosystem service for cities. Alongside this, however, regulating ecosystem services, which are also essential to human survival and are provided virtually invisibly by the peri-urban zone to cities, are irreversibly affected by the conversion of peri-urban land for urban expansion, unwittingly undermining the very life support services on which urban inhabitants depend. Protecting and enhancing these ecosystem services on the edges of our cities is a foundational component to ensuring the holistic resilience of 21st century urban environments. Ngā mihi nui, thank you.